Welcome to the School Garden Podcast with Mary Jo and Anne. No matter where you are in your school garden journey, whether you are an experienced garden teacher, a novice parent helper, or a struggling home educator, we are here to help you and your kiddos in your garden space. Come and dig in with us because school gardens matter. Good morning and welcome to the School Garden Podcast. We're so happy to have you back. Hey, Anne, how's your week been?
It was a great week. I actually used one of the ideas from your last podcast. I used the book, The Day the Farmers Quit, with a second grade class at my school, and we made thank you notes for our farmers. We're going to finish those next week, and they were so cute about wanting to know the names of the farmers that I knew, and their notes are darling. So excited.
Oh, that's brilliant. So Anne's referring back to the last episode that we did, which was a garden read aloud, and we give about 7 examples of really great books that you can take out into the garden. So we've had people using our podcast email.
I know.
podcast@madegreen.com. We've had some great messages come through about the podcast. We have had a request for a particular episode and particular content, and that is about growing onions.
This is a great time of year.
It is. And we did an episode about growing potatoes. That was our second episode, which goes in right this time of year. And alongside it, people usually plant onions. So people have been going, oh my gosh, potatoes are for sale next to onions. How do we plant onions? Shout out to our Fort Worth ISD garden educators. Thank you for listening and thank you for requesting. So here is your episode about growing onions.
I loved researching this. So I love to grow onions. And some of the reasons why they're an easy crop to grow, particularly in our area. We're in zone 8 and we can plant onions actually a couple times a year. But right now, at the end of January, beginning of February, this is a perfect time for onions to go in the ground. So listeners in other parts of the country, you'll want to check out your planting calendars for your areas to know when to plant best. In our area, we can grow 2 onion crops a year. You can start them from seed in the fall and they overwinter and they're ready in the early spring. You give up a lot of space for that.
Yeah.
And so I tend to do a February plant and then we harvest in May. I'm always looking for crops that go through their entire life cycle with kids, and onions are a great crop for that. So my interest in onions started when I was working at a museum and my friend Chip, shout out to my friend Chip, hi Chip, was doing a professional development with teachers, and he pulled out an onion and he asked us, what part of the onion do you eat? And I thought, well, that's an obvious question. We eat the roots. And he proceeded to cut the onion in half. And then he started to share with us, we really don't eat the roots of an onion. And if you look at an onion closely, you recognize that. So one way to see this for yourself is to take a close look at the next onion you slice open for dinner. Slice it from top to bottom and carefully look. So there are roots at the bottom, but we don't eat those. There's a little disc right above the root, and that's a stem. It doesn't look like what we think of as a stem, but it is. And occasionally there's a small vertical bit that's part of the stem as well. So all the layers around the onions are actually modified leaves that surround the stem, and that's what we eat. So onions are a bulb, and they're actually part of a family that includes garlic. It includes shallots and leeks. We're familiar with those, but it's also in the same grouping as an amaryllis. So if you love those beautiful flowers, there's a connection between onions and amaryllis.
So the allium family,
yes,
isn't it? Yeah.
Allium, yes. When you think about planting onions, you have options. You can plant from seeds. You can plant from slips or dormant transplants, or you can plant from sets, and those are dried onions that are a year old. Seeds are great, but they take a long time. And so I tend to plant from slips. Yeah. They're an entire plant, so my kids can look at the parts of a plant. They can see the roots and the leaves. They can watch it grow. They're familiar with that. And I also wanted them to grow things that they don't grow from seeds, to see other ways to grow things.
And those slips almost look like a green onion, don't they? So here in Texas was the first time I actually saw them grown from slips. In the UK, we're just used to growing them from sets, you know, which look like a tiny little pickled onion, don't they? When you see them all bundled together, you're like, huh? But they're actually, like you said, just a transplant.
Now, how do onions grow? This is a really important aspect that I've just learned recently that really helped me move from failing with onions to success. Onions are what's called photoperiodic, which means they need a certain number of hours of sunlight before they begin to produce a bulb. Now, I love the way they organize these groupings. One is called long day onions, one is called short day onions, and one is called day neutral. Obvious titles, but they're so helpful. So long day onions need 14 to 16 hours of sunlight
Wow.
before they even start to make a bulb. So we never get that in the southern United States. You get in the northern United States up into Canada. They get longer days in the summer, so they want longer day onions. And it's cooler, and that's exactly what they want. What we want in Texas or in the South generally are what are called short day onions. They need 10 to 12 hours of sunlight a day, and they complete their life cycle earlier. Onions like cool weather.
They do.
Now, the third group, day neutral, they're the laid back of the onion groups. They can bulb at 10 to 16 hours. They don't care.
My kind of onion.
Right. Now, this is the tricky part. If you go to big box stores,
Oh, yeah.
you can buy onion slips and onion sets, but you typically don't know what type of onion they are. And they're buying for the whole United States. So you may get an onion that's not appropriate for your area. So when we're buying onions, we tend to buy them from small local nurseries.
Yeah.
And we're really fortunate in North Texas to have a great feed store called Russell Feed.
Oh,
They know their stuff. They source locally. And so they brilliantly in the right product. So find a feed store in your area. Find a local nursery as you're choosing your onion and ask them what type it is and look it up. It's a short day. So we've talked about the photo period. That's really important. We've talked about the choices that you have of seeds, sets, and transplants. Now let's move on to how to plant them.
mm-hmm.
And whenever I plant them, I want to connect them back to the classroom because we want to do that all the time.
Yeah.
So I love to use planting onion slips to focus on mathematics, and we focus on non-standard measurement.
Yeah.
So onions are best planted about 1 inch deep in the soil and about 4 inches apart. So before we go outside, I give the kids a ruler and I ask them to find something on their hand that's 1 inch long and something that's 4 inches long. And then I let them know we're not taking the rulers outside, but we're still going to measure. And when we're outside, we use our hand shovels to dig up that soil and loosen the soil, remove any rocks that are in the way that would change the shape of our bulb. And since onions are heavy feeders, I also add a layer of compost from my compost pile on top, and then we mix that together.
Yeah, very hungry crop.
I lay out brightly colored yarn or string in rows that are about a foot apart, and we plant our onions. 1 inch deep. They take their finger and make a little hole, put the onion in, and then the next onion goes in at 4 inches apart. Now, one thing to watch for, if you buy your onion slips and the white part's really big, measure that before you do this activity, because if they're really big and they're 2 inches deep, you're going to need to cover the white part of the onion. So it may need to go in a little bit deeper. Okay. So you may have to make changes as needed.
And in a bundle, you get a real mix, don't you, of kind of like sizes and shapes. So that's a good point, actually. Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to remember to do that.
And there's nothing wrong with, after the kids leave, fixing any mistakes that you see. After the students leave, I water them in deeply. If I have any fertilizer in the shed, I tend to use an organic balanced fertilizer. And I place that on either sides of the onions. A beautiful literature connection that I use is the book Tops and Bottoms by Janet Stevens. Isn't it great?
I love that book. Give a bit of a snippet.
Well, it follows the very complex relationship of neighbors, a bear and a hare, and how the hare is trying to make the most of his crops by perhaps taking advantage of a bear.
Oh,
maybe not.
I know. Let's not spoil it. But it's a fantastic book. But it really is about how plants grow, whether they grow on top of the soil, or they grow under the soil. And there's even one in the book that's highlighted as kind of being considered as growing in the middle. But we won't spoil that for you. That's for you to find out. But I love there's this wonderful little exercise that I do with the kids once they've listened to the story, particularly with the younger years when they begin a bit squiggly and a bit fidgety. Everybody stands up and we just say the names of vegetables. And if they think it grows on the top, they put their hands on their heads and they all go top. Or if they think they grow it's under the soil, then they put their hands on their bottoms and wiggle about quite usually and shout bottoms. And it's really, really it's neat. Even without the book, just a wonderful exercise, because you'd be surprised, even some of the teachers that possibly come out into your garden about very unaware or unsure of how and where certain plants grow.
Wonderful. So we've got our onions in the ground. Let's talk about how to take care of them. So you really want lots and lots of green growth above the ground, because that's where the energy for the bulbing comes from, is all the beautiful leaves that you're going to create. So if you can, you have the budget or the materials, you want to fertilize with a higher nitrogen fertilizer at the beginning of the growing season. And once it begins to bulb, then you can stop the nitrogen. Mm-hmm. It doesn't need any more. Its energy is going into the bulb. There have been a few years, though, I have no budget for that. And so I just don't fertilize.
And then just trust in the compost, trust in the good soil. But don't be alarmed by the amount of green going on top and it looks like nothing's happening with the bulb because it needs to do it that way around. We promise the bulb will get there.
Lovely. They also need really consistent watering.
Oh my goodness. There's the ultimate question for us, isn't it, really? Truly, please don't get too hung up about watering. It is something that you will eventually get the feel for as you're out in your garden and doing it. So what happens with onions is that they have incredibly short roots, particularly onion sets. Slips have a little bit more of an obvious root stock, and it's very much that white bulb, so it's easy to see which one it is, but they're very short. So when we're putting them in the ground, those roots have got to do a lot of work to get established. And when you harvest onions, you'll be surprised about how long and how much they root. I'm always surprised. You seriously matted, heavy kind of netting of root, and we're asking that bulbs and those slips to do that. So it needs that really even moisture for those first few weeks as those roots start to grow and then to establish and connect to the soil. So do keep an eye on it. You want the Goldilocks. Not too much, not too little, just right, But again, you'll get the feeling. It's good to know what to avoid, which helps with watering. We want to avoid them sitting on very waterlogged soil, which leads to them rotting, and then that's game over for your onions. I would rather go dry than I would fully watered. Do that finger and that knuckle test. Pop your finger in the soil. If it feels good, it feels damp, you're good. If it's dry, water. If it's at all anything else, don't water.
Now you'll know your onion is beginning to create a bulb as the bulb starts to come above the surface of the soil. We call it shouldering up.
Yeah.
Now you don't want to cover the bulb with any more soil or mulch. You want to let that be exposed. But it's a great feeling when the kids start to notice that they're starting to push up out of the ground as part of their growing process.
It's so gratifying, isn't it, when you see it start to bulb? Because even me, I'm like, it's just a lot of leaves.
But it is very gratifying. It is.
So the other thing I think really worth mentioning is something that could happen to your onion, and it's called bolting or going to seed or putting up a flower. And this will happen to a couple of your onions for sure, particularly here in Texas because our weather fluctuates so much. We can have 30 at night, and then honestly, on Monday, it's going to be 80 degrees here, guys. In February. Come on. So really the onion's got to contend with that, and it likes a cool growing season. And with that fluctuation, it's going to react. And that's all that it is. A flower putting up its scape, which is the stem that comes out of the middle of the bulb. And that's it's putting out its flower, putting out its seed to continue. And it does that because it's, again, a defense mechanism about the fluctuation of weather because it's just getting warm. Or it even does that with an inconsistent watering schedule as well. Now, if you catch it early and you see that it's starting to produce like a little flower, cut it off down at the base and you might be able to save it, okay? And your onion will just carry on growing. If it's gone too far, your bulb starts to get woody, it goes quite tough, and the onion just doesn't taste good, and then it's kind of gone. But it's a great opportunity to watch that lifestyle of the onion plant growing because it will then put out this scape, it will flower, and then the flower will dry, and there will be the onion seeds. And that's fantastic for the kids to watch. Actually, it's a very beautiful flower. It is really, really beautiful and an excellent pollinator. So if a couple of your onions do bolt or go to seed, it's just an incredibly awesome pollinator flower to have for the rest of the stuff in the garden. So expect it. Don't get sad. The best gardeners here in Texas, percentage of their onions are going to go there. And it's not your fault. It is the weather. I heard this thing the other day about the difference between the UK and America. And say in England, we have a climate. In America, in Texas, you guys have weather.
I think that is so accurate.
That is so accurate, having kind of lived it as well. So garden friends, it's weather. Just don't get despondent. Don't get dismayed about it. Catch it early if you can. If not, just let it go and let it become a pollinator.
So let's talk about harvesting.
Yeah.
So there are two different times you might consider harvesting in the school garden. One is right before school ends so that students can see how the onions are progressing. Onions can be harvested and used right away after they bulb.
Mm-hmm.
And this timing allows them to see the entire life cycle, to have something to take home to show their families and possibly cook in their homes. Another option is to allow the onion to go through its entire life cycle and harvest it at the end of its natural life. That will be in summer for us in Texas.
Right.
So onions will store for a really long time if you take care of them properly, so your students can start the next school year by seeing the onions they grew the previous school year. And they really love to see what happened to the onion that was small when they harvested it in May, because it will be much smaller in May than when it's harvested in June or July. We can also use these onions as a welcome back gift to teachers. You always want to keep the garden in the forefront of teachers' minds at your campus.
Sure.
That's hard to do sometimes, but if you have gifts for them throughout the year, the onion's a great way to start, and they're so good. That's a great gift. So here's how to know when your onions are ready to harvest. You want to look for leaves that turn yellow and then fall over.
Yeah.
Some leaves may be perfectly green on the plant, but others have yellowed and fall over. That's a signal that, hey, they're getting to the end of their life cycle. Once you see leaves falling over, you know that onion's not putting any more energy into that bulb. So there's no need to water. Stop watering about 10 days to 2 weeks beforehand. You want to harvest on a dry day. You don't want to harvest right after it's rained, because that dryness in the soil helps the onion, the outer leaves, start to crisp up or dry up, and it makes it better for the onion later on. You'll pull them straight out of the ground and dust them off, but don't wash them.
It's about that rotting, isn't it? Think of all those layers and layers, and it's getting that moisture trapped in all those layers. And if it doesn't get the opportunity or the air or the dryness, and that, it will rot.
Exactly. So you don't cut the leaves off. You want to leave them in place at this time.
So how I like to kickstart the drying process of my onions is I harvest them, and then I just lay them on top of the soil. I once went on holiday to Spain, and we were there for onion harvesting, and there was just fields with just onions laying all around it. Oh, it was great. And so just lay them down. Ideally, if you've got even wire mesh shelving or something like that, even better, because you've got that ventilation underneath it as well. No more than 2 days on one side, turn them the next, and that really kickstarts that drying process. It also dries off the soil, because like Anne said, don't wash them, because that really does kind of, for rotting and things like that, it really helps you brush off that soil before you bring them into that ultimate storage as well.
And you want to place the onions in a single layer in a cool, dark spot. Now, in the summer here in Texas, there are no cool, dark spots outside. And so you'll find some place inside. So I use my laundry room, and it also has some airflow, which is great.
Yeah.
And I use the plastic trays that I get from the nursery when I buy a flat of plants. You lay them out in a single layer and let them dry. And you'll leave them for a few weeks. Sometimes this process can take a few weeks.
Yeah.
You're watching for the leaves to get crumbly and ugly and dry.
Mm-hmm.
Feel the neck of the onion, the top of that onion, and make sure it feels perfectly closed off and dry.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, you know you've cured them. You can cut the leaves off about an inch above the onion to give it space. Or you can watch lots of YouTube videos and go down a rabbit hole on how to braid all those leaves together to make beautiful onion art.
I once went on a French onion braiding course. Oh, it's the worst in the class.
Wow. They had that as a class.
They had that as a class, and well, that's a whole level above us.
I know.
It's artistry.
It is. And so there you go. How to plant onions and care for them with your class.
Yeah.
We hope this was helpful.
Funny story time.
Oh my gosh, I've got a story about onions in a school. So usually at schools, we're harvesting them and sending them home. Oh my gosh, with fourth grade class. And we harvested these onions, and they each had 4 or 5 onions. So we're talking way over 100 onions. Listeners, fresh onions harvested out the ground are incredibly pungent. These kids took 5 onions each into their classroom. This classroom had no windows, right? They stuffed them into their lockers, ready to take home. At the end of the day, the smell of the onions, honestly, and the teacher was so gracious. I kind of warned him, but even I was absolutely shocked by the smell of the onion in this classroom. And, he was he's fine, it's so great, I'm so happy the kids have had this opportunity. And, he said all the right things. FYI, they will be smelly. So maybe, I don't know if you arrange to have them kept outside or maybe just in the hall, something. Buyer beware. Hugely pungent. And then let me tell you a little bit of a story about onions are a mysterious phenomenon that happens with freshly planted onions. Because people go, oh my gosh, people have been in and vandalized and thrown them all around and things. And I think, and I just want to say, no, it's birds.
Oh,
Birds are real onion vandals. So this happens particular with onion sets. Remember those ones that look like teeny miniature, tiny little onion bulbs that you're putting in. They really do put out this one little green shoot at first that comes out. And from above, the theory is that birds think it's a worm or a very interesting insect. They think it's dinner. So they come down, they pick up the onion, they go, what? And then they just drop it. So kids often, or you, your garden, whatever, will then go, why are the onions scattered all around, haphazardly? And it's because birds have realized it's not an onion or anything remotely tasty and have dropped it, which is why that even moisture is really important, because you want to get them rooted as quickly as possible, because onions root really well. So the bird comes down, tugs at it, it's not going to give, and off they go. And then they've learned then that that's not anything remotely tasty to eat. It's not budging as well. So it's not moving, but yeah, phenomenon of the scattered onion.
love that. I will watch for that.
Kids questions time.
Hi there, my name is Truett, and I'm in 4th grade. My question about onions is this. Why do onions burn our eyes or make us cry when we cut them?
So, Truett, thanks for that question. And I have to tell a story about Truett. Mary Jo and I did a workshop this past weekend about potatoes and onions, and Truett got to come with his mom and his brother. And he was the best student in the room. He would ask questions. His observations were on point. And he asked this question out of the teachers in the room. So
Shout out to Truett, the best 4th grade gardener out there.
that's right. So there are two interesting things going on when you cry as you're cutting an onion. First of all, the onion has defense mechanisms that deter animals from eating the bulb. So it's a way they protect themselves. So if an animal or a person with a knife pierces the onion, that action breaks down the cell walls, and some enzymes are released along with a really weak sulfenic acid. It's not sulfuric acid, sulfenic acid. Now, these combine in the air above you and makes a gas that moves into your eyes.
Okay.
I know. Now, your eyes have a defense mechanism too, the way they protect themselves. Whenever something irritates your eye, like an eyelash or this gas from the onion, they produce lots and lots of tears to wash away whatever's irritating them.
Brilliant.
I know, so it's a combination of two defense mechanisms.
Defense mechanisms and that.
Okay. Thank you again, Truett.
Okay, do you have a tried and tested method to avoid your eyes watering?
Actually, I just cut them in crotches, and I don't even try to waste time on the ideas.
Yeah, and that's it. But so you're not that person that stands on one leg with steam in your mouth and just, I'm not that.
Are you?
Wow. Okay. Tried once or twice.
Oh, so thank you guys for listening again. We hope this is a helpful way to think about onions. Quick reminder that in North Texas, they need to go in the ground by the second week of February at the latest. Next year, you might want to think about a January planting time. But we wanted to get this episode out because we had so many requests. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to hit the follow button on your podcast platform of choice. And share us with a friend, please. Also, we'd love for you to rate us and leave a comment as well. As always, you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Made Green, or visit us at our website, www.madegreenwithane.com. Details of today's shows and other resources are in our show notes. Any proceeds from affiliate links shared help fund our school garden programs. We look forward to seeing you next time on the School Garden Podcast.